Get started. My name is Laura McBain. I work here at High Tech High, and I want to welcome you once again to the second week of the second session for the Deeper Learning MOOC course that's starting this January. Today we're going to be doing a tuning protocol that's focused on academic mindsets. And today will be slightly different than what we had the other day, in the sense that we're going to be asking folks to write in questions into the chat window on the live page for the DL course. So we're going to be taking a lot of questions from the group today. But before we jump into the protocol and I explain that, I'm going to ask the folks in this Hangout to kind of take about 30 seconds and give us their name and where they're from. So why don't we just start with Ben Daly, and we'll just go right down the line.
Hey, Ben Daly from High Tech High.
Ben Kruger.
Hello, I'm Ben Kruger from High Tech Middle. I teach 6th grade math and science.
Wonderful. Brett.
Oh, my name is Brett Wessner. I teach math at Cleveland High School in Seattle, Washington.
Carissa.
I'm Carissa Romero. I'm the Associate Director of the Project for Education Research that Scales, or PERTS, at Stanford University.
Eduardo.
I'm Eduardo Briseño, co-founder and CEO of Mindset Works.
Rob.
Hi, I'm Rob Reardon. I work at the High Tech High Graduate School of Education.
And Will.
I'm Will. I'm a 12th grade math teacher at High Tech High International.
Wonderful. And Karen, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm Karen, and I'm helping to co-facilitate Dlmooc, and I have this grand scheme I wish you could see of 3 computers in front of me right now, and I'll be running between chat rooms. So holler
Karen,
if anybody needs anything.
Do you think you can show the slides for us real quick? Thanks. Are they up there? I might be having some troubles, but
I think you're having bandwidth problems, Laura, and you might not be seeing everybody else, but they should be.
I think so too. Okay, so why don't we jump in? Weird, I was fine just a second ago. So what we're going to do today, folks, is if you want to show the tuning protocol overview slide, that would be great. What we're going to do today is we have Brett here, and she's going to be giving us a dilemma that she's focused on in her classroom. And the way the protocol is going to work today is that she's going to take about 3 to 4 minutes to examine the dilemma, give us an overview, and why this is a dilemma within her school and within her practice. And then I'm going to give our audience and our people in this room about 2 to 3 minutes to generate some clarifying questions and post some of those clarifying questions right into the chat windows. And then Brett will have an opportunity to answer some of those questions, and she'll take about 6 minutes for that. And then we'll jump into probing questions, and I'll give you again about 2 to 3 minutes to kind of generate some probing questions, and again post them right into the chat window. And then after their questioning round are over, we're going to have a general conversation for about 10 minutes about this dilemma and how we can help Brett kind of solve this and give her some advice on this. And then she will come back into the conversation and give us her new thinking, anything that's been an aha for her. And then we will kind of debrief this conversation to see how it went so that we can improve this for our stuff in January. And then take a minute to kind of close the loop. What did we learn from our own for their own practice from this session? Do you want to go to the norm slide for us real quick? And just let me know when you're there, since I can't see it.
We're there.
So, great, thanks. So the norm slides for any time we do protocols here, with online or whether in person, we try to be hard on content and soft on the people, in the sense that although we don't know, I don't know Brett personally, I know she's a wonderful person, and so we're going to try to push her thinking today as much as possible, but we're going to be gentle about it. The next thing we're going to do is be kind, helpful, and specific. It doesn't help Brett all that much to say, you know, this is great work, we love it, We want to know what is good about the work specifically, and then we also want to help her with specific possible suggestions. And then the last one is step up, step back. We have about 7 people in this hangout, and then we have folks that are chatting in. So we want to make sure there's opportunities for all voices to be heard. So just monitor your airtime. And then this is just for my group in this room. Of course, is if you are, obviously all of us have a headset. You know, if you're not talking, make sure your microphone is turned off so we can lower the bandwidth. And of course, try to make sure that we are limiting multitasking. We're going to try to focus on this conversation for the next hour or so, and then make sure that our videos are close up so we can see everybody. So that being said, I'm going to turn the camera over to Brett, and she's going to take about 3 to 4 minutes to kind of give us an overview of this dilemma and who she is. And this is just our opportunity as participants to listen to her, and she will have the air for about 3 to 4 minutes, and I will then prompt us during each stage of our sessions today where we're going. So Brett, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. So again, my name is Brett Wessner. I teach geometry and pre-calculus this year at Cleveland High School in the School of Life Sciences here in Seattle. We are a problem-based and project-based school, or a STEM school, and we also implement complex instruction. So in that way, so in terms of our classroom management, we do a lot of using roles and really as rich as possible, kind of multiple ability tasks to be really purposeful about reducing status issues in the classroom, so that all students have access and equitable access to learn math, regardless of their prior experiences in math. We also grade a little bit differently than many traditional high schools here. So we use school-wide learning outcome rubrics. So we grade on their content and their geometry knowledge, but also on their oral communication, professionalism, written communication, and their use of technology. So we have a lot of pieces that I think really add up to creating a really well-rounded student and create a lot of opportunities to talk about academic mindset and all of the different pieces and how you can develop all of those to really be a good, well-rounded kind of growth mindset human being, but also really a good student and how you can really learn and persevere in your learning. So I think my dilemma comes from when we're designing tasks that get at either, you know, pushing forward in a problem. So I gave a peer editing worksheet, or just presenting the regular kind of everyday warm-up activity. So I gave a rubric for how we grade that. Those are kind of the 2 things that I gave. You know, those are all everyday things in our life here in the classroom that we need to do. But I think we've tried to design them and be thoughtful around designing them so that they do push at having students really seek a challenge or get feedback or build their confidence around learning. I think my question then comes up, how do I effectively really communicate and integrate those activities into my classroom so that students are aware of the learning that they're doing and the reflection that they're doing for their individual growth. I think sometimes, you know, an example, when I have 90 seconds to transition from one activity to another, and I need to say to students that it has a content objective and they're going to be working in their groups, that objective, and also on top of that, like by the time I get to a 3rd objective, I've lost it. So, you know, how do I effectively kind of communicate all of the behind-the-scenes effort so that they see it and start to become aware of it as teenagers in the classroom and, you know, throughout their day?
Great, Brett. Thank you so much. That was just about 3.5 minutes. Nicely done. So what we're going to do now, folks, is we're going to take about 2 minutes. And Karen, thank you. And we're going to take about 2 to 3 minutes, and I'll time us here, to generate what we call clarifying questions. And clarifying questions are questions that have a simple answer. Yes, no, data question. How many students are in our class? Do you teach math? What grade levels? Things like that that might help us understand her dilemma. I'm also going to encourage folks if you would like to, is on the live page, you'll see some examples of the rubrics, peer editing worksheet, and a peer editing exit ticket that she's provided for us as some of examples of her work. So I'm just going to give us right now, as a community, about 2 to 3 minutes just to take a look at her work and then post some questions right into our chat windows. And then I will give Brett the kind of cue to say, why don't you start answering some of these clarifying questions. So as a community, let's take about 3 minutes to look at her work and post clarifying questions into the chat windows. Thanks.
Laura, where is the work?
Oh, her examples are...
When I click on that link,
yep.
I just get...
If you scroll down to that page where it has the big chat, you'll see her name, you'll see panelists, just keep scrolling down, and it says supporting documents from Brett's classroom. I will just, I actually would just...
Okay, I see. Okay.
Just in case, I'll paste them in for our group right here.
And for people who, yeah, I put the first two in.
Great.
For
Thanks.
people who are on the live page, they're over in the document to the left-hand side.
I'm going to give us just about 30 more seconds or so. So if you haven't posted questions, start doing that. Okay, so Brett, we're going to ask you to start answering some of these questions. I think it'll be really helpful, just so for everyone, if you could just read the question that you're answering aloud so we know which question you're answering. That would be great. And then everyone else, continue to pose questions. You know, this is we have about 6 minutes for this, so if you have questions as you go, just continue to post them. We will make sure she gets to as many as she can. So Brett, why don't we turn it back over to you, and you'll have about 6 minutes to start answering those questions. And again, if you could just read the question that you're answering, that would be great.
Sure thing. So a couple that came in, what subject do I teach? So I teach math, secondary math. I teach both high school geometry and pre-calculus. And how many students do I have in a class? I have around 32 in all of my classes. We're an inclusion school, so in the mix of that, at least in both of my geometry classes, which is where these samples came from, and it's a little bit more the mindset of my class right now, or my dilemma right now. I have around 11 or 12 IEP students in each class as well, so that's a little bit more about the makeup of my class too. How long are the class periods? We have 85-minute block period, or 80-minute this year block periods. And how many classes do I teach? I have 2 geometry sections and 1 pre-calculus section, but I do see my students every day, so we're double blocked in math. So I just have the 3 sections. Have I assessed students' academic mindsets? I have not ever directly assessed that. It's something that we have talked about doing maybe in advisory, but I've never done it in my math classes. How often do we do peer edits in the class? About every time that we have a report, which is a couple times a year. Kind of for the bigger reports, we do peer edits. Partly it's a little bit selfish on my part because then a lot of the minor mistakes get taken care of, but it also they can push each other. Their writing is a ton better. There was a question about who created those documents. The peer editing one, I cannot take credit for. I stole from our humanities teachers and changed it and tweaked theirs to kind of match our needs. But I thought it wise to leverage what other teachers in the school are doing in other contents, and it actually really helped because our students had seen it before, seen something similar before, so I got to kind of just piggyback on somebody else's work a little bit, which was nice. Based on my dilemma, I've been asked if do I want to be explicit about the goals of the self and peer assessment, and I think I do. I don't kind of know if I should and how I should tell my students about kind of the academic mindset that's going on around it. If I need to be super explicit about that, or if their experience through it will kind of work for the 15-year-old brain, kind of learning about how they're growing and what they're doing in class. I've been asked how students are currently receiving or experiencing assessment and feedback. We are just kind of in the midst of our first row report, so we actually did kind of the peer edit this time. So we try to give them consistent feedback on things throughout. We do standards-based quizzing, so they get multiple kind of attempts and they get feedback on how that's working. So I think that's something they're pretty comfortable with overall. The question here, you've mentioned not wanting to give too many directions. Do I explicitly describe the mindset goals and which mindset goals? And that's not something that I don't think I've ever said that they were mindset goals. I think I've been relatively explicit about why students are doing something. That's something that's very common and is very much in my kind of wheelhouse of how I run my classroom. But I don't know if students really understanding that it's a kind of a bigger picture thing. So I don't know if I need to also kind of have a math goal and then their kind of group work and collaboration goal and then also the mindset goal, or if there's a way to tie them all in where students will still get it all. You said, I've got a question that was talking about the growth mindset pieces built into the classroom. So the question is, what specifically do I do to promote academic mindsets? Do I teach them, and do we use certain kinds of praise and feedback? One of the things, I would kind of maybe have 2 answers. we don't, as a school, have anything, we don't use a rubric for academic mindset. We don't, kind of as a school have taken this on comprehensively. So this is something that so it's not taught everywhere. I do a little bit of work with it in my advisory, directly teaching it. I'm freshman this year, so I am kind of experimenting with that a little bit. But so I don't directly teach it. I do think that in the praise and feedback, a lot of the feedback I give, especially in the moment, when we're kind of assigning confidence to students around their work, it is always around their either kind of an interesting way they found a way to do something, a really smart way to think about something differently, the fact that they persevered and were able to get at the math because of their perseverance. So it all is tied into the content, and we try to make it really immediate, relatively public, and then kind of about content, how it was so great that they were able to do that because look what they were able to learn. How much time do I have with my students every day, and when do I give the warrant presentation rubric out to students? So I have 85 minutes with my students, or 80 minutes, sorry, schedule changed this year, and I keep forgetting that. 80 minutes this year with students, and the warm-up presentation rubric, we gave that out and went over that with students ahead of time, and then actually up by our projector, we have kind of hints about it for the presenter. So students go up and present, and we give them feedback, right? As they kind of write on that rubric and then hand it to them when they're done. But that goes in the grade book. And at the same time, we also are assessing the audience. They have to ask questions and push the presenter, because oftentimes the presenter only kind of half knows how to solve a problem on purpose, so that we get to see those mistakes. Great.
We're about out of time for clarifying questions, but maybe we'll take Rob's last question, because I think you got it. One of the questions was, an example activity of what you might do, and I think you started talking about that, and maybe you can talk a little bit more during probing. But last question that Rob had is, who fills out the presentation on presentation rubric? That's his last clarifying question.
A teacher in the room does. One of us does. So we try to stay completely out of the conversation. Once the presenter's up there, they're kind of running the room, and we just sit in the back. So.
Great. So thanks, Brett. This is a lot of questions that you just answered, and you're not off the ticket just yet. We're going to move into kind of probing questions. And if Karen, you want to put up the probing question slides, that would be great. And just for our audience here, probing questions are questions that help us kind of understand this dilemma a little bit more. They're really questions why is this deeply an issue for her. And Brett has the opportunity to say, that's a really great question. I haven't thought about that answer. And that's okay, because that means it's a good probing question. You might want to, some example probing questions maybe, what's her biggest worry? What's another way you might consider thinking about this? If your question does begin with, I wonder if you've tried or have you considered doing X, those are often signs of what we like to call advice in disguise. And so we're going to try to avoid advice in disguise questions, and we're going to save those ideas for our discussion in the next round. But what I'm going to ask you folks to do is, again, let's take 2 minutes to chat in some probing questions that you would like to ask Brett, and then I'll just give Brett the cue to start answering those questions. Okay.
And before we go on, either for people who joined us late or just to reiterate, Brett, can you just give us again just a 30-second description of the dilemma?
Yes. Yeah. So my dilemma is in my classroom. I believe that a lot of our activities are designed to both meet kind of a math content learning goal, but also to promote behaviors in students and mindsets of students that are good and positive and moving forward. But I'm not sure if I do it best, or kind of how I might improve. How do I effectively communicate and integrate these activities into my classroom that do develop the student awareness? Because I don't know if I have created enough awareness around the benefits of of the way that we're pushing students and why that's a good thing. And I'm wondering if that mindset piece has gotten lost in terms of the content and the collaboration and the, you know, all of the other yada, yada, yada. How do I bring that mindset to be on an equal level in importance?
Great. Thank you. So let's take 2 minutes and let's generate some probing questions and we'll chat them in. Okay, Brett, another round of questions. So I'm going to give you about 6 minutes again to just kind of, and again, these are a lot of questions. So as a probing question, if it's something you're not sure the answer to, say it's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, and that's okay. So we'll just let you jump in again. If you could just kind of read or reiterate the question really quickly, and then we'll have about 6 minutes.
Okay. So I got a question about, do I think that my students really believe that they can improve their intelligence and abilities and that they belong in a learning community and that they can succeed? And I think I believe some of them do. I do not believe that all of them do. And I think that's something that we fight with our population of students for sure. Let me see what else. Do I think that students and perhaps staff understand the importance of these mindsets? I believe that our staff does, for sure. I don't think we've taken on kind of a comprehensive approach to it, so I don't know how effective, or if we're not maybe kind of leveraging each other and what we're doing in each other's classrooms enough. Do I think that students, still have fixed mindsets, and does it feel like they don't understand why we take the kind of approach we do? And I think that probably hits pretty close to home in terms of feeling like they don't necessarily understand. And this is the first year that I've actually gotten to teach pre-calculus instead of teaching just underclassmen, and it has been so lovely seeing them come back as older students and you can see that they've had a lot of progression and start to get it. But I don't necessarily know how to do that with the 14 and 15-year-old brain and have them start seeing it. Do I think that students see that these activities will really genuinely build these skills? And if so, what do they value the skills that they'll be building? I'm not sure they do. And there was another question here about kind of how we have, and I've lost it now, but how we've communicated this to students. Does our school have a clear communication about collaboration and mindset? I think around collaboration, we do as a school, especially as a math department. So our entire math department, all 9 of us, teach using the same collaboration. So especially as they are starting to go through, they know what our expectations are for sure. In terms of mindset, I'm not sure they're getting a clear perspective, and it may be piecemeal. We may be all saying kind of the same thing, but without a coherent, like a full comprehensive and across the board language. So that may be part of it. What is leading me to feel that students are not aware? I think as we hit really the meat of one of our really big projects this year, the fear of it suddenly, because it has gotten, like, the stakes have been upped a little bit, suddenly there's a big fear of trying something. There's a lack of motivation to kind of persevere, and there isn't, quite as much of a tackling the problem and then monitoring how you're doing and seeking feedback, and those kind of general, what we would love our students to do. Those things, while they've been okay, I think it's becoming really, really clear right now when we've kind of upped the ante and it's a little bit of a bigger project and it's the first one of the year really, and because we've hit second quarter, that it's just become a little bit more apparent. And I wonder how to help support the students now so that by the end of the year and our next big one, they're better off. I got a question. What is my sense of the importance of being explicit about academic mindsets with students, and are there reasons not to be explicit? I think that's one of my wonders, which is why I kind of said, how do I effectively communicate? And a little bit of that to me is, how much do I need to communicate? Or through experiencing this, by the time they get to be seniors and they can do something, they can look back, they can kind of be like, oh, I'm good, I get this now. But I wonder how much they can really take in and how many different objectives they can really balance in their brain and still do geometry. So that was kind of one of my questions, is how do I do it, and how much do I really need to do? The question I think has popped up twice, that have the students ever evaluated or assessed themselves? And in terms of their mindset, no. I will be honest and say that they haven't. They have reflected on their learning, and they will do that a lot at the end of this project, actually, this one that I'm talking about. They'll do a lot of reflection then, kind of pushing us forward into second quarter fully. But they haven't done it now. And do my students keep learning logs or journals, and what are some of the routines for reflection in our classes and in our school? We do not keep journals in class. They keep their comp books, but it's for their mathematic work typically. One thing that does make me think of is, we often do exit tickets, and exit tickets in all of our classes can vary from something that's really kind of content-centric, or can be a little bit more reflective in nature, but can be short. And that's something that we have tried out, like maybe once a week doing, every Friday doing one that's a little bit more reflective or a little bit more getting to know you or something like that. So maybe that's something I need to bring back and do better about. But.
That's about all the questions, and we're out of time. I'm going to keep us moving forward here. Brett, nicely done. Those are a lot of questions. The hard part for you is now over. This is your part to kind of sit back and listen a little bit. But before you kind of sit back and listen, can you restate the question for us? And we're going to go into general discussion.
Okay. So my dilemma or question is, how do I effectively communicate and integrate academic mindset activities into my classroom that develop student awareness and reflection for their individual growth?
Great. Okay, folks. So thanks, Ben Kruger, for typing that in. So what we're going to do is, Brett, if it would be easy for you, you can just turn your camera off. That way the conversation will be going not directed at you. What I'd like to do is, Karen, if you could show the group conversation slide. I'd like us to kind of start with what we can celebrate first. What are the strengths within the situation? So let's start with just that. What do we want to celebrate about the work that Brett is sharing with us, and then we'll build upon her question and ideally come up with some possible solutions. So if you're in the chat room, if you're on the live chat, just start with what do you want to celebrate. For people who might hang out, I'm just going to ask you to start talking. The microphone will follow you as you speak, so I'm just going to ask you to jump on in and start talking, and then we'll kind of move our conversation together to kind of recommendations and perhaps some suggestions for her. So let's start with celebrations, and anyone in our room can start. And it will take about 10 minutes for this conversation.
This is Rob. I'd like to celebrate Brett's sense of purpose, and the sense of purpose that appears to be there in the school of having all students gain access to academic content and learning to learn skills, and also this focus on content, communication, and collaboration. Those three. The fact that they have these kind of broad, they're after cognitive and non-cognitive skills, and they're very, very explicit about that, and seem to be very aware of that.
I love the resources that you shared with us, Brett. The exit tickets and individual reflections, and especially the peer-to-peer feedback forms and process that you shared, I think are a great strength, and they facilitate great learning and academic mindsets.
Yeah, I agree. I want to echo that. I think a lot of the tools that you're using already sound like tools and practices that would promote particularly a growth mindset. So the self and peer assessment, kind of these open tasks that allow students to think more deeply and struggle. And then it sounds like you were kind of describing participation quizzes, or at least that's what Joe Bowler would call it. A lot of what you're talking about actually reminds me of what Joe Bowler in the School of Ed at Stanford talks about in her most recent MOOC that she did on promoting a growth mindset in the classroom.
I'll say I love the purposefulness with which they're focusing on this. I think it's just so cool. I love that she mentioned purposely reducing status issues within the classroom as a great way to get at a sense of belonging. I think that's the first step, is kind of leveling the field so that then kids can believe they can be part of an academic community. So that kind of clarity and purposefulness, and also the courage. I compliment her and her staff, and that willingness to take chances and kind of shift the focus to look into mindsets and how they can more effectively integrate them.
And I'll bring in a comment. Sorry, I'll bring in a quick comment from the chat room, which is we can celebrate that students are providing feedback through the exit cards.
I think I also, just in terms of warm feedback, some of the stuff that came up was just talking about the sense of purpose, and I think that seems really clear to me, and also just her desire to really help kids gain these tools that are going to help them much further in life. And I also agree with what someone else said earlier, that it looks like a lot of the stuff is already in place and probably could just use a little bit of tweaking or just her kind of refocusing some of the questions. But I think a lot of the work that they're already doing really is going to support her desire to really focus a little bit more on mindsets with her students.
So let's jump into some. We've got about 7 minutes. Why don't we jump into some possible suggestions? You know, what's underlying here? What possible ideas might we have for Brett as she kind of continues in this arena? And again, in the chat, live chat, feel free to text in ideas. And then in our room, of course, let's just jump on in. So
I have one suggestion. I love the peer editing exit card. It is about the product. And I think it might be possible to kind of splice in some stuff about mindsets in that kind of exit card also. Where in creating this project did you struggle? What did you do when you did struggle? What kind of help did you get from your friends in this peer editing process? So that, and if the question is about how do I get all of this stuff in together, I think in an instrument like that you can begin to kind of merge those things of the product and the process together.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that and say that in my classroom, this is a big thing that I do, and I do a lot of that is trying to get the students to be more explicit in their awareness. I think, you know, Brett was sort of struggling with should I, shouldn't I, can they? I think it's true some students might not be there, but some are. In my experience, if you articulate these ideas and you share, I even share some of the research sometime if they're at that place, that they can wrap their head around it. I think that becoming metacognitive about these ideas actually really helps them grow as a learner. So and it helps with the kind of assessment cycle, this idea of like, are they developing skills? Well, if they're thinking about these skills, like, and explicitly looking at their work and their study habits and what they're doing with this idea of, am I struggling and how am I struggling and how am I overcoming these and do I believe I can succeed and does this have relevance? Then they can give you exit cards, they can give you forms at the end, and have a sense of, oh yes, I'm improving with this, I'm struggling with this. That allows space for conversations, their own awareness, and also gives you kind of a pulse of sort of like who's struggling where and how the group as a whole is doing. So I totally agree that maybe some kind of more explicit feedback or assessment cycle could be valuable on both ends.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting dilemma. And I actually learned a lot from listening to it, because at first I was thinking, you're doing all the right things, you have these open tasks that are allowing students to struggle, your assessments are really focusing on the process and whether or not they're learning. I don't understand what you need to do to change, but now I'm kind of realizing that it seems like you need to motivate why students are doing all of these different activities, or at least it sounds like that's what you're asking us to help you do. And I also hear you that you don't want to give students kind of an extra thing to focus on, right? You're giving them a math goal, this collaboration goal. Do you want to add in a mindset goal? And I really can relate to that worry. So I think one way to kind of do that might be to just have one goal. The goal is to learn math as best as we can. So what's the best way to learn math really deeply, to kind of reach your potential in math? And the way to do that is you have to struggle, right? The people learn the best when they're struggling, when they're thinking really deeply about it, and just communicating maybe that explicitly. So it's up to you whether or not you want to communicate what mindsets are explicitly, but even if you don't do that, you can communicate that the goal is to learn math, and the way you learn math is by doing hard things, is by making mistakes, and that's why we're doing these kinds of tasks, because they're allowing you to think deeply and to struggle and to make mistakes, and that's what's going to make you good at math.
I really, I want to add to that too. I really like that idea, but I love the idea of being explicit with the students on the purpose of why you're doing it, and really taking the time to share a little bit of maybe some of the research behind it, but really a lot of the purpose behind it and why it's important to Brett, because I think if she communicates why she's spending time doing this, why it's important to her, the students will understand and they can be involved in the conversation. And I love the idea of the transparency of bringing this dilemma to the students. Here's something I want to do. I want to add this in. I want you guys to be thinking of this. Here's why I feel it's important to involve them in the conversation. And as Rob mentioned, I think he was talking about the exit slip that had the 4 questions on it, and I really love that exit slip, because it's really the students kind of reflecting on where they're at in the process, and that would be very easy to tweak. It's already thinking about them as how they're working as learners, and that would be something that's open-ended. It's about the student evaluating them and assessing themselves on where they're at, and I think that's a tool that they could use really easily to tweak and really be explicit about some of the mindset work that she's interested in bringing in.
I wonder about this, and I think Ben got at that question, Ben Daly, about how explicit do you need to be. I wonder, and I'd be curious from you folks, is how do you balance kind of being explicit and in having people understand the struggle that they're going through, but at the same time making it authentic for the students? So it doesn't feel like, hey, I'm just reflecting on collaboration right now. I'm reflecting on I struggled in math. I think the key here is how does it make it real for the kids so they really do. They're motivated. So I'm kind of curious about that balance between being explicit, but then also authentic for the kids.
Well, I can say in my classroom, one thing that I see year after year as a huge moment that changes my kids is I have them reflect every week on their struggles and their homework and what they're doing. And I've noticed that what happens is when a student makes a change, so I always force them to try different things. You study different places, different times, with different people. And when the moment happens when they realize that, oh, I studied at the library for the first time ever, and I was able to do 2 hours of work in a way I've never been able to do before. It hits at a lot of different things. It gets at that growth mindset that this can change for me, and it's a huge moment of efficacy where they have success where they've never had success before, and they begin to realize that they can be an academic learner. It also links to the first mindset. They begin to see themselves as someone who can succeed in a really challenging academic setting. So for me, you know, as I've been at High Tech High almost a decade now, I find that more value is gotten in my class from the mindsets than the mathematics. And I actually do the kind of a little bit of the twist or opposite of what Carissa was mentioning, is I'll have my kids who just don't believe that math is valuable. Maybe I try and I try and I try, but I can't convince them that it's the greatest thing on earth, which it is. And so I use it the other way around. I actually say, well, just think of math as like brain push-ups, that is getting at the sort of grit and growth mindset, and that persevering through calculus makes you just stronger in general, and that's a huge value added, even if you can't see the real beauty and value in the calculus itself. And so I've actually been able to successfully get at some of my non-mathy kids by using these mindsets, which I think people understand if you explain like how valuable it is to be able to persevere through difficulties. And I've had a huge amount of success in the years but by doing that. So I find that moment, so back to your question, Laura, is if kids can articulate clearly, like try something different and see how that changed them, it gets to the growth mindset because they realize they're not just a bad student, it was just they were studying poorly in the wrong place at the wrong time or with the wrong people. And I think that's been hugely empowering, and I see it in the classroom.
I think that's really interesting because, you know, before I was saying you might need to explain like that our goal is to learn math, but of course there are students who maybe don't care about learning math. So in addition to giving that growth mindset piece, you need to motivate it. Like, what's the purpose? Why should you even care about learning math? And I think your approach kind of gets at that really nicely. It gives them another reason to care about learning math, you know, for other things they might care about in life.
Exactly.
Something else I loved about... sorry, go ahead.
I think that Carissa's earlier comment about focusing in on the goal of learning math and what it takes to learn math well and the value of struggle is a really wise suggestion. I think it's possible for kids, particularly 14, 15-year-olds, they get overloaded with goals, and there are so many goals that they're trying to attend to that they lose track of the main goal, or they just get lost. So so I think it might be. I wonder if it would be possible to have articulated overriding goals around mindsets and so forth that are up on the whiteboard. They're there all the time. There's stuff that's they're in the culture. They're the water that we swim in. And then the goal for today is this math that we're trying to learn well, so that it's not as if we're bringing in a whole set of goals every day. We have overriding goals that are with us all the time, and then we have these content goals that we're really focusing on, something like that. Just one other quick comment about the peer editing worksheet. And this has to do with creating a community of learners, another important learning mindset. I see two different stances in that peer editing sheet. The first part, which is the checklist, asks students to judge the work. And 14 and 15-year-olds very often think then they have to behave like the teacher. The more open-ended questions ask them to be an audience. What struck you? What seemed strongest? What suggestions would you make? Though in those more open-ended questions, for me, that's where the sense of community lies, of building with each other. And I would be happy with, in my classroom, without the checklist and simply with that other audience response kind of thing, because I feel like those are really conflicting roles that sheet asks students to take.
I think I love I love what Rob was talking about the sheet, and also you can teach kids and show kids what those activities are doing for them as learning strategies or as self-management strategies to increase their own interest and self-efficacy. And I think that ties to what Will was saying, which I love, which is the idea of, for kids who are not interested in math, they don't like math. He was teaching them, well, you can meet your goal of doing better in this class if you think about this differently. Think about it making you stronger throughout, generally throughout your body, and that seems to be working for him. And it's a strategy that they can learn and then they can act upon. So those kind of, or reward substitution, okay, you have this long-term goal, it's hard to be motivated by long-term goals. How can you reward yourself in the short term? And so I love that you're building the structures like the exit tickets, but also you can teach the kids, look, this is what you're doing, and you can do this in different situations to better manage yourself. And then the other thing I would say is, I heard Brett saying she thinks some of the kids have, or students have, strong academic mindsets, but probably a lot don't. And I think an idea is to reflect on why that is, and focus on how can I get my students to believe that they can change their own abilities and intelligence, that they belong to a learning community where it's a cool thing to challenge yourself, explore the world, and learn, where they think that what they're doing is interesting and valuable, and they think that the activities that you're giving them is something that is actually going to genuinely and authentically build their skills that are going to achieve, to help them achieve their goals, and that they can succeed. And there's different ideas for how you can build those. Like, in a learning community, you could engage when students are entering the school. You can engage upper level classmates who live those values and beliefs to introduce the students, because the freshmen look up to the upper classmates, or with a growth mindset, you can teach them about what, how the learning process works, what the zone of proximal development is, how people, build their ability to think, and what it takes to succeed, either through examples, Einstein or Michael Jordan, or, there's a ton of ways to do it. But if you think about how can I get my students to believe this and to understand this, I think you can go a long way.
And Karen, final comments.
I just want to share quickly a couple suggestions and thoughts from the audience. So Emilio says, I wonder what it would look like if students had a voice in creating the rubrics. Would that increase their awareness of the purpose? Mm-hmm. Zoe says, I wonder if the peer editing worksheet is more of a conversation as well as being documented on the sheet. I also think adding in reflection on the process would help solidify the goals in the students' minds and help them understand mindset. And then finally, Edric says, wondering what would happen if students gave each other feedback on their exit tickets, or what would happen if they used their exit ticket to start conversations the next day about effort and struggle.
That's great. So folks, I'm going to wrap up this conversation because we're getting close to our time, and I'm going to have Brett come back in really quickly and give us some feedback. And Brett, would love to have you kind of take about, traditionally have 5 minutes, but I don't think you'll need 5 minutes, maybe just about 2 to 3. Just a quick kind of reflection on what you heard. It's not a play-by-play, not everything that you heard, just kind of any new thinking that this conversation has struck for you.
Great, thank you guys, all in any chat room that were looking at this and providing feedback. I really, really appreciate it, genuinely. I think 2 things, or kind of 3 things that I am taking right now from this is, one, I am relieved to know that there are kind of good steps to take, right, that students can do this and that they are natural from the current work that we're doing, that they're easy, not easy, but they're clear steps that can be taken from our work, and it's not a complete overhaul or change, or, to get to where we want to be, hopefully. One thing that popped up for a second that I happened to hang on to for some reason in my brain was that the awareness may come in for the kids and the questions that I ask them, not in what I tell them at the beginning. So, I think a lot of times what we've all, what everybody's mentioned are kind of exit flips or reflections at the end. And I liked that idea right at the end that just came in from the other chat, that maybe using that as a starting point the next day. But so much of that reflection, I just wonder if it really just needs to be in giving my students the 5 or 10 minutes they need with a question that I've asked for them to sit for a second, rather than tell them what they need to be aware of. Just let it naturally happen and be wise about the questions I ask. So I think for me then, it's just thinking about kind of my next steps from this conversation are just thinking about the balance of, I think we were tossing up now kind of two purposes of like, do we make it that the academic mindset is the big one, and then the math supports that, or is it the math and the, how does this really work? A chicken and egg kind of situation. And how do I balance those two and make that really work? How do I, that one, the peer feedback slip that I know is a little bit dual purpose, because the top part is, are these students putting in their report what they absolutely need to meet items on the mathematic content rubric? And then at the end, with a little bit more open-minded, their audience, how do I balance those two? That task I think was trying to balance in one document, and I think that's maybe the struggle that I'm having in my classroom overall, really. But how do I do that better and implement this? So that's kind of where I'll move from here.
Great. That was just about 2 minutes. You're fast, and I'm being mindful of everyone's time here because we're just out of time. You had a little bit of tech issues in the beginning, but we're going to move to our debrief. And for folks who are in any of the rooms, I would love it. And again, I'm going to be mindful of our time because I know some people do have to go. So I'm just going to kind of put the question out there. You can chat in, or the people in the room, you can kind of pipe in. What do we like about this process? How might we improve it? Did we have a good question? So if you're in the live chat, you can kind of respond to those questions. Again, how did this process work? Again, knowing we want to do this in the future. What do we think about this process? Did we have a good question? How might this process of the dual chatting, Twitter, and everything else that's going on right now in this hour might be improved? And we'll kind of close up with that last thing. So let's take about 2 minutes or so, maybe more than that, probably 2 to 3 minutes, to talk about the process that we just went through. Not the actual conversation, but again, the process that this hour was about. And anyone can chat in and type or just start talking.
I'll say in terms of following the norms, just because I feel like I was in a bit of a vulnerable position perhaps, but I think in terms of the questions that were coming in and kind of being kind and thoughtful but still wanting to push, I think that was done perfectly. So
great. Others?
I think we had a great question to address, and I think that as a group we really stayed with that question pretty well.
Mm-hmm. I think I liked that the question was kind of nuanced. Like it seemed at first like she was doing all of these great things, but figuring out even when you're doing these activities that promote academic mindsets, how are ways that you can tie that together, make it meaningful for students? And I found that I learned a lot from this conversation by thinking through that.
What do we think about the process for some of you doing a protocol, not done a protocol like this, the idea of clarifying and probing questions in this discussion? How did that work for you? Also, people that were chatting in questions, for example, from our live chat, all these other questions, because it was a lot of questions from Brett. How did that feel?
I always wonder about having a moment for some dialogue with the speaker at the end to kind of the panel after the discussion. So all these ideas got out there, and then a little chance for her to maybe ask, Rob, you mentioned this, can you go further, or this or that, like a chance to, I don't know, to sort of probe our suggestions or observe. I don't know. I just missed that moment of dialogue between me and Brett because I think that could be really rich too. I don't know how we'd stick that in there, but that's just, I always, when I do these, think about that moment.
It's always that extended closing the loop conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah. Other ideas?
Just building on that, at first I think it was great, and I love the challenge of trying to do this in an hour, because I think this is a big challenge, and it felt rushed, and I feel like we could have spent a couple of hours at least talking about this, but I love the challenge of trying to come up with a lot of ideas quickly. I think in building on Will's observation, I think that this protocol is great, and in particular when people don't know each other very well, it kind of prevents the person receiving feedback from acting defensively and being able to and not that you would have, Brett, I'm just saying the structure of the protocol, and I think that when giving and receiving feedback, there's a lot of value in conversation and going back and forth, and that's where I see the weakness. So if I was in a group of people who know each other very well and trust each other really well, I would love to see a lot more conversation to really understand things more deeply.
Agreed.
maybe Ben and Ben who's been quiet, Ben Kruger or Ben Daly, who've.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
The thing I was thinking, I don't know if this is actually on our topic, but you know, I don't know Brett personally, but I feel like invested in her classroom now, and so now I was like wondering, how can I find out how this goes? You know, so it's like, you know, I don't know if this will continue with like the other part of the deeper learning MOOC, but you know, I'm just curious now from our time together, like how to follow up and see how this goes after the fact and how it's going to be implemented. You know.
I love that comment. I think that's really nice, and I feel the same way. One way we could stay connected, and maybe in this, you know, Brett, this would you have to tell us if you have time to do this, but the G+ community for Dlmooc is a great way to do that. So maybe we could just do some little check-ins there. And I love that just in an hour we do feel like invested in it and want to stay connected and hear more.
So I'm going to kind of close this up, and one thing that we like to do when we've done these protocols is kind of what Will is suggesting is kind of closing the loop. And you'll see on the slide or from when you're hearing from me, anything that we have taken away from this conversation for our own practice. What questions does it raise for us as practitioners? And maybe what I will do is kind of keep it short. People can chat things in, and maybe one or two people in the room want to share out, and everyone else maybe just type in on the live chats. Sorry, the people in the room, you can chat in, and then people in the live chat in there. And maybe one person from here wants to share out what this has brought up for them.
I'll share one really quick thing. I think it was Rob mentioned the idea of the overarching theme for things, and I think like that came up the other day with some visitors at High Tech High asking about our overarching themes, and I think it's a lot of things that we have that we live by here, but I was interested in the idea of kind of making that a little bit more explicit sometimes for kids and having other things kind of fall under that umbrella. So I was thinking about that a little bit.
Anyone else? Looks like Will's about to talk.
I could just say that I really like that we're being at High Tech High. This conversation is coming, and because there's several of us here, and I think there is something to be explicit. I mean, this is definitely my bias to Brett, but I mean, the research I think with Josh Aronson and of course Carol Dweck is that actually making kids and adults specifically and explicitly mindful about these things actually helps them develop. And I think that research is actually pretty clear. So I'm really excited that we as a community are doing that, because I think it's going to lead to good things.
I'm reminded of Rob's famous quote, you know, of simple tasks beget complex results, and the idea of how you have open-ended questions for kids is where the authentic reflection comes. So, we are just about out of time. I'm mindful of everyone's time tonight. So it is about a little after 5 o'clock. I'm going to turn it over for Karen to give us some reminders, and then I will close us up.
Great. Well, I just want to thank everybody for being here, and just remind you to visit the Dlmooc website at dlmooc.deeper-learning.org. And there are a couple more activities going on this preview week. One is Put It Into Practice activity around assessing our mindsets. And if you haven't been to the G+ community, a couple of people there have been puzzling through that, and one person created their own mindset assessment form that we all can look at and use. And then there's also a Tweet of the Week activity about just describing something short that you have or used to have a fixed mindset about and why. And there have been some great tweets about that, #FixedMindset. And we are storifying and summarizing all of the great activities from this week, so watch for that to be posted probably Friday morning. And there's a lot of great readings and videos on the website. And lastly, don't forget to sign up for the full version of the MOOC in January. And we look forward to getting your input on the preview week as well, which we'll be sending out a survey and getting input on G+, because we want to just make this as good of an experience for everybody as possible in January. And we appreciate all the excitement and participation this week.
Great. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Brett.
Yep, thank you so much.
And thanks to our audience.